Paul Gauguin, a man who traded the bustle of Paris for the wild colors of islands, and in the swap he rewrote the language of modern painting. Imagine a canvas where color is not a description but a shout, flat plains, midnight outlines, and figures that seem carved from memory. Picture the yellow Christ, a crucifix painted not in halting browns but in a sunburnt yellow that feels like a revelation. Picture a sprawling Tahitian panorama asking, "Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going?" A question painted across an almost mythic horizon. Picture Breton women clutched in a visionary red churchyard, and Tahitian girls at ease on a beach framed by strange, simplified shapes. From Brittany to the Caribbean to Tahiti, Gauguin chased a new kind of truth, not photographic, but elemental. Stay with me. This is the story of a restless life, a stubborn technique, scandals that never entirely left him, and paintings that still whisper and unsettle. Born in Paris in 1848 and raised for a time in Peru, Paul Gauguin carried a split identity, European upbringing braided with distant Pacific memories that would haunt his imagination. As a young man, he worked as a stockbroker in Paris, a polite profession that financed a growing appetite for art. He married Sophie Gauguin and fathered 5 children, living a double life of ledgers by day and paint by night. In the 1870s, he began collecting and making art while still supporting his family. The turning point came in the 1880s, when the stability of commerce cracked under the pressure of an artistic calling. He chose the uncertain life of a painter. If you hear audacity in that choice, it's because he left a secure job in middle age to follow a stubborn inner voice. Here are 2 intimate self-portraits. Gauguin looking back at himself as both maker and myth. Gauguin's formation was messy, grafted from many sources. He admired the Impressionists' light, but felt their smallness of ambition. He loved Cézanne's structural solidity and the Japanese prints that flattened space and simplified line. In Brittany, in Pont-Aven, he found what he called a spiritual echo, peasant life, archaic rituals, and a palette that could be intensified. There he met younger painters like Émile Bernard and traded ideas about simplifying form. The result, an approach that rejected optical realism for something more declarative. A curiosity, Gauguin often wrote or scribbled titles in Tahitian or invented phrases, a small linguistic gamble that mirrored his pictorial experiments. He also admired folk carvings and non-Western art long before primitive art became a trope in Parisian salons. These threads braided into something new, synthetism and cloisonnism, words that mean, respectively, synthesis of form and color, and the use of bold outlines to separate flat color areas, like stained glass on canvas. Gauguin's signature style emerges like a set of rules he kept breaking in interesting ways. Look at the Yellow Christ, 1889, a monumental religious scene flattened into color zones where the sacred becomes domestic, local, and startlingly modern. In Vision After the Sermon, 1888, painted in Brittany, he collapses depth and uses a luminous red ground to stage a biblical battle as a private hallucination. Moving to Tahiti, his palette brightened and his motifs shifted. Spirit of the Dead Watching, c. 1892, is eerie and intimate. A reclining girl, a watchful shadow, rendered in deep, unnatural tones that heighten mood over anatomy. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? 1897-98 is an epic meditation stretched across a horizontal canvas. Children, mothers, elders, and a blue, inscrutable figure at the horizon. He painted Tahiti not as an anthropologist, but as a myth maker, rearranging reality to probe universal questions. Technically, Gauguin reduced modeling, favored strong outlines, and allowed color to carry meaning. He called his work synthetic in the sense that he synthesized sensations into symbols. This is cloisonnism in practice, dark contours like metal strips around swathes of color. It's a look that shocked viewers who expected delicate impressionist light, and it became a visual vocabulary for artists who wanted clarity and emotional directness over optical illusion. Curiosity. Gauguin sometimes painted on rough wood panels and even carved into surfaces, his art-making spilled into sculpture and printmaking, a tactile impulse visible in the solidity of his painted forms. There were distinct pivots in Gauguin's life that rerouted his art. In 1888, he accepted an invitation to Arles and lived briefly with Vincent van Gogh. Their time together exploded in drama, intense collaboration, heated arguments, an atmosphere charged with creative electricity. That winter ended abruptly, famously, and the two men parted, leaving an indelible influence on each other. Next pivot, travel. In 1887, he journeyed to Martinique, seeking color freed from European restraint. In 1891, he sailed to Tahiti, hoping to escape civilization and recover a more elemental life. He returned to France briefly, then went back to the Pacific. These relocations changed his palette, his subject matter, and his public reputation. Another turning point, financial instability. Despite some sales and the occasional patron, Gauguin often struggled for money, a pressure that pushed him into high-risk moves, physically and artistically. Curiosity. He sometimes painted his own myth, posing himself in works with symbols and halos. He cultivated an image as a kind of suffering prophet of color. Gauguin's technique is deceptively simple. He preferred flat planes of color, bold contour lines, and deliberate simplification. When I say impasto, I mean thick paint. Gauguin used impasto sparingly, favoring smooth but expressive surfaces. He often applied pigment in broad, confident strokes and sometimes sanded or scraped to achieve matte textures. He experimented with supports, canvas, wood panels, and even ceramics and prints, because the idea mattered more than the medium. He carved wood sculptures and made lina cuts. These crafts informed his painting's sculptural solidity. Gauguin also mixed pigments to achieve hues that were not merely naturalistic but symbolic. Ultramarine blues became expanses of sky and melancholy, acid yellows read like sunlight and theological intensity. He sometimes inscribed text or Tahitian words directly onto the work, inviting viewers to listen as well as look. Curiosity. Some of his palettes included pigments that had recently become commercially available, new synthetic colors that allowed a brighter, more artificial palette than 19th century paint once allowed. Two themes recur: the search for origins and a fascination with the sacred and the erotic. From Breton crucifixions to Tahitian nudes, Gauguin pursued a kind of primitivist longing, the idea that simpler societies offered spiritual clarity. He used recurring motifs, mothers and children, idols and birds, night and dream figures. Symbols often stand in for questions. The blue idol and where do we come from functions like a silent oracle. His palette itself becomes a symbol. Unnatural color equals emotional truth. Another motif is juxtaposition. Pagan and Christian imagery set side by side, innocence placed beside erotic undertow. Curiosity. In Tahiti, he borrowed from local myth, but he rearranged it. His Tahitian titles and images are sometimes hybrids, part observation, part invention. That blend is why his work feels both documentary and mythic. During his life, Gauguin provoked admiration, bafflement, and outright hostility. Critics in Paris found his flattening of space and crude outlines aggressive and naive. Others hailed the raw power of his color. He sold some paintings, but never achieved steady financial comfort. Controversy clung to him for moral reasons. His relationships in Tahiti with young women, sometimes minors by modern standards, are rightly criticized today and complicate his legacy. There's also the question of cultural appropriation. Gauguin used Polynesian imagery for his own poetic ends, often ignoring local realities. Yet artists admired him. His formal experiments helped open modernism's doors. Curiosity. He staged his life like a narrative, sometimes altering dates or facts to build the myth of the exile artist, a self-fashioned biography that blurred truth and performance. What Gauguin left is not a tidy school, but a set of provocations. His emphasis on color as language shaped Fauvism, think of Matisse's audacious hues, and his flattening of space paved the way to Picasso's abstractions. The idea that non-Western art could revitalize European practice became a central, if problematic, theme of 20th century modernism. Artists borrowed his motifs and his bravery to simplify, to symbolize, to make art that feels like a poem. Museums, critics, and scholars continue to reassess him, both his formal innovations and the ethical costs of his colonial gaze. Curiosity. Despite his failures with money and health, he was remarkably prolific in his last decade, producing canvases, sculptures, and prints that would only be fully appreciated long after his death in 1903. To stand before a Gauguin is to step into an economy of essentials: color as pulse, contour as decision, and image as question. He was restless, sometimes reckless, often visionary, a painter who believed that art could travel beyond the facts of sight into the facts of feeling. His works remain unsettling because they combine beauty with ethical unease. They call us to admire and to question. In the end, Gauguin taught painters to listen to color and to trust simplification as a way of seeing deeper truths. His canvases, from Tahitian beaches to carved idols, from yellow Christs to mythic horizons, still insist on being looked at and looked into. When you leave the gallery, the question he painted across a horizon still lingers. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? It's less a riddle now than an invitation.